thing. We must not see eye to eye on the idea of a government that must forbid things in order to
Really?
protect
What is the
families.
government's role? You've told me several times.
How about national defense?
Yeah, I consider this national defense, pal. Our families are under attack from people like you with these lyrics.
John, you don't have to buy them.
Could I make a statement about national defense?
Yeah.
The biggest threat to America today is not communism. It's moving America toward a fascist theocracy. And everything that's happened during the Reagan administration is steering us right down that pipe.
Oh, Mr. Zappa, you're not really serious if you're saying we're going toward a fascist theocracy.
That's right, we are. When you have a government that prefers a certain moral code derived from a certain religion, and that moral code turns into legislation to suit one certain religious point of view, and if that code happens to be very, very right-wing, almost toward Attila Hun,
well, then you are an anarchist. Every form of civil government is based on some kind of morality, Frank.
Morality in terms of behavior, not in terms of theology. I'm not going to give you a civics lesson here, but
Were you able to hear that?
Yes.
Everybody could see and hear that, right?
Yes.
I'm gonna put your camera on there for a second, okay?
Why?
So they can see you.
All right, please, everybody should please mute. Please mute.
Mute.
Hundreds of minority Shia Muslims have held a protest in the Afghan city of Herat during the funeral of Sultan Uzbek Musi, shot dead. The government shouted death to the man who is held in community security.
No basement.
Yeah, Mace? Yeah. By who?
My Connie.
What's going on now? Too late, bro.
And that is a foundational problem with our society. And whatever you think of my opinions, that's going to be something that puts you in danger.
Yeah, and that is because this city is run by Jewish communists and criminal niggers. That's exactly what it is.
And that's true, by the way.
Nonviolent protesters.
I'm not even saying we're non-violent. I'm saying that fucking we didn't aggress. We did not initiate force against anybody. We're not non-violent. We'll fucking kill these people if we have to.
Hey, let's get on. Let's go.
Do we need more people in here? We've got Vice in here.
Is this a fucking media right here?
Yeah, exactly. Fucking Vice jumped in the fucking van. Open the door, let him out. If we gotta kick the media out, we do.
Why don't you tell me what you think?
Huh?
What do you do for the Daily Stormer?
I am a feature writer. I do the crypto report, and I'm generally their man on the ground at events.
So, what do you hope to get out of today? Like, what does it mean to you?
Well, for one thing, it means that we're showing to this parasitic class of anti-white vermin that this is our country. This country was built by our forefathers and sustained by us. It's going to remain our country. I believe, as you can see, we are stepping off of the internet in a big way. For instance, last night at the Torch Walk, there were hundreds and hundreds of us. People realize they're not atomized individuals. They're part of a larger whole because we have been spreading our memes. We have been organizing on the internet. And so now they're coming out. And now, as you can see today, we greatly outnumbered the anti-white, anti-American filth. And at some point, we will have enough power that we will clear them from the streets forever. That which is degenerate in white countries will be removed.
So you're saying showing up in physical space lets people know that, like, there are more likes than
We're starting to slowly unveil a little bit of our power level. You ain't seen nothing yet.
State of emergency has been declared, so they on the protest and emancipation.
We're going to give riot warning. We're going to try to get compliant, but this is now effectively a riot.
49 hours declaring it a riot.
55 to 50 be advised, Capitol Police one advised they're trying to breach and get to the Capitol.
We have a breach of the Capitol! Breach of the Capitol! We need to hold the doors of the Capitol. I need court support.
We're not going to see it.
Okay.
We lost the line. We lost the line. We want to get back. We want to get back up to the upper deck. We want to get back to the upper deck.
They were peaceful people. These were great people. The crowd was unbelievable. And I mentioned the word love, the love in the air. I've never seen anything like it.
I don't. Okay, we've seen now 3 video clips in chronological order. I'd like everybody to please make sure that you are muted. Please make sure that you are muted.
Can you move east to about 3rd Street at the crossover?
Just a moment.
It's January 6th, 12:50 p.m.
In a little over an hour, Trump supporters will be roaming the halls of the U.S.
Okay, sorry about that. So we've seen three. Can you hear me okay? All right, 3 video clips in chronological order. They're all easily accessible on YouTube. The first one was Frank Zappa, of course, leader of the Mothers of Invention. By the way, the first rock concert I ever attended on Mother's Day, 1970, at the Academy of Music here in Philadelphia. But this was 16 years later. On March 28th, 1986, Frank Zappa, with his hair cut, wearing an outfit suitable for corporate America, on a now infamous appearance on CNN's Crossfire with Robert Novak and Tom Braden and John Lofton, Zappa contending that America was moving toward a fascist theocracy. August 2017 in Charlottesville, 2 snippets of an Emmy Award-winning report by Vice News Tonight correspondent Elle Reeve with white nationalist leaders, including interviews with the shirtless Christopher Cantwell, and in the van with Robert Ray of the Daily Stormer. And finally, a 2-minute clip that most of us have seen too many times from January 6, 2021, showing the mob of Trump supporters storming the U.S. Capitol. Was Frank Zappa correct? Were his words prophetic? Is America moving toward, or has it in fact already become, a fascist theocracy? Well, as it happens, we happen to have with us today 2 experts who are pretty well placed to put this in perspective. I want to welcome everybody to the 8th in a series of free Zoom programs presented in 2023 by Sons and Daughters of Holocaust Survivors of Greater Philadelphia, one of the world's first such organizations, founded in 1979. We know where hatred leads. Today's program is titled White Christian Nationalism and the Crisis in American Political and Cultural Life. On February 8th, 2021, barely a month after that unforgettable day that we just watched again almost 3 years ago when the US Capitol was breached, I appeared from my Philadelphia home with 2 of my journalism heroes on a program based in Atlanta at the invitation of the host, Norman A. Carter Jr., a former Philly cop, on his excellent WCEG talk radio internet program, Issues and Answers. Mr. Carter is on the call today with us, and I hope he'll have a chance to talk a little bit later when we turn this over to a Q&A, but he's in a runoff election for city council in Snellville, Georgia, and I'm going to encourage him to explain how you can donate to his campaign. Making rare public appearances today are the same 2 journalism heroes who appeared with me on Mr. Carter's show. From Maryland, Christopher Simpson, author of the award-winning 1988 blockbuster Blowback, America's Recruitment of Nazis and Its Effects on the Cold War, which the Philadelphia Inquirer, in its review on Sunday, August 7, 1988, called thoroughly documented, at times astonishingly so, and compellingly written, and an example of the very best in American investigative journalism. I couldn't have said it better myself. Oh, that's right, I did say it because I wrote that review. Professor Simpson taught journalism for many years at American University in Washington. He served as research director for Marcel Ophuls' Oscar-winning documentary, Hotel Terminus, The Life and Times of Klaus Barbie. And he is the author of the 1995 tour de force titled The Splendid Blond Beast, Money, Law, and Genocide in the 20th Century, which New York Newsday called a savage and eloquent attack on international law and its failure to stop mass murder. And no, I did not write that review. Also with us today from Detroit is Russ Bellant, a political activist and journalist, author of Old Nazis, The New Right, and the Republican Party, author of The Coors Connection, how Coors as in Coors beer, Family Philanthropy Undermines Democratic Pluralism, and The Religious Right in Michigan Politics. Mr. Bellant was a significant source for my 1988 articles exposing former Nazis in the GOP, which you can find on my website. I am deeply honored that both of these great American journalists have agreed to join us today to talk about white Christian nationalism. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Chris Simpson.
Yes, that's me. Where would you like to go with this?
Well, we talked about opening up a question to our audience about what they think is the progenitor of this disease.
I could answer it better if I had a little more time to think about it, but I'll give you the short answer, and that is that there has been a nasty underpinning of American life and culture almost since the days of the colonists, and it's still with us. Say for example, I was looking into the question of, well, what are the progenitors, as to use your term, that we should have a look at it, and I think that one of the things that's worth asking, well, there's a couple things that are worth asking, and I kind of like to go back to the footage that you already showed. That was the torchlight parade at the Charlottesville march, which turned into a riot, as everybody knows now. The gist of it is that I wanted to raise the question of where did this particular disease originate? And I don't think that there's an easy answer to that, but I do think that there's a knowable answer, which has to do with who pays the bills and who carries the load. If you're in one of those groups, your life plan is often pretty well set out for you, I think that undermines really important aspects of the American experience.
What would you say is the largest or most influential white Christian nationalist organization historically in this country, Chris?
Do you want a fast answer?
Sure.
It's the Ku Klux Klan. Always has been. Very influential, particularly in the American South, but not only in the American South. The Klan is the preeminent source of Christian nationalist ultra-patriotism, and has always exploited Christian nationalist ultra patriotism to to its own ends, and I expect it will continue to do so. That's where the Ku Klux Klan came from.
What does Christian mean in the context of American society?
Well, usually Christian in American society means good, the good guys. But you have to take that with a grain of salt, like many other instant labels that people or groups get. In the specific case of the Klan was you have to ask yourself, well, what was the earliest white Christian organization active in the United States? And the short answer is the progenitors of the Ku Klux Klan. That's how they presented themselves. That's how they advertised themselves. That's how they were able to draw people into what they had to sell. And the Klan, I imagine people here are already familiar with this, was the largest and most terrorist and most dangerous ultra white power type organization in the United States. It still is today, unfortunately.
And would you consider them to have been historically an actual branch of the United States government?
That's a more complicated question. I wouldn't call it a branch of the U.S. government, if only because the U.S. government is so sprawling. But it is true, nonetheless, that across the country, excuse me.
Okay, you're welcome. Russ Bellant, you have to unmute. There you go. Hello, Russ. Sorry, folks. So Professor Simpson will be back with us shortly, I'm sure. Russ, bring us in the present day. We have seen, actually, in recent days, we have seen rising to the top of the American scene, the new Speaker of the House, as essentially the latest emissary of what we're calling white Christian nationalism. But what led us, Russ, from the Ku Klux Klan to Mike Johnson?
Well, many of us were attentive to events in the 1970s. And by the way, I want to say hello again to Norman. I remember us from a few years ago. And I look at the evolution of the Klan from its power base from its founding in 1869 through the 1960s and so forth. I see the right wing reforming itself in reaction to a broad range of issues. They were reacting to the growth and the influence of the civil rights movement, but also of Roe v. Wade, also the Equal Rights Amendment, which was an active campaign that looked like it was going to succeed. The rise of the anti-war movement and the persistence of anti-war sentiment in the 1970s, and the rise of independent nations and the decline of colonial empires, which disturbed them as well. And this is what was commonly called the rise of the new right. In the 1970s, you had Jerry Falwell, you had the emergence of Pat Robertson, James Dobson, D. James Kennedy out of Coral Gables, Florida, and others that were not just conservative evangelicals in a theological or even a political sense, but activists to transform the country into a different kind of nation. And when Reagan got elected and took office in 1981, the powers behind these folks, the moneyed people, the Nelson Bunker Hunts, and I left out the John Birch Society, which grew in influence during this time as well. I thought I was speaking loudly enough. I'm glad somebody's asking me to do better. After the Reagan was elected, the powerful funders of these movements and the leadership of these movements came together, about 400 people across the country, and they formed the Council for National Policy. And the first criteria of membership was you never mention the name or the existence or reference the meetings of the Council for National Policy. They were supposed to be totally secret. And from that networking, from those meetings, they began planning the strategies that they thought would be politically effective. And with the presence of the funders, again, this would be the people like the Amway brothers, Amway twins, they called the DeVosses and the Van Andels, the Coors family, the Nelson Bunker Hunt, and other oil interests as well. Those would be a quick summation of who some of the folks were. They could impose discipline on these groups because they were funding them, and they could bring people together and work together. Whereas before they might have been more sectarian or self-interested or self-motivated. And they began planning the campaigns for consolidating the power of the right in the United States. And, if I take one of the other glues is their ideology. In general, all the ministries, so-called ministries that I talk about, Dobson, D. James Kennedy, the Pat Robertson Empire, Christian Coalition, and so forth that was formed at this time. They all had an ideology called Reconstructionism, Christian Reconstructionism, which basically held that the Bible, we're going to get back to Mike Johnson in a minute. You're going to hear Mike Johnson here, the current Speaker of the House. The Bible is the foundation of society, and secular documents such as the Constitution are not biblical. So we're not guided by the Constitution. We're guided by the United States should be ruled by Old Testament law. And as you know, some of that can be pretty brutal. And but it was appealing. And they had tied into networks that were waging wars on other continents. Nicaragua, as you know, the Contras in Central America, but also on behalf of the apartheid regime in South Africa, where various states were seeking independence and eventually became independent in one way or another. I attended their meeting, not the Council for National Policy, no outsider could get into that, but I attended the international meetings where these folks were coming together. I attended the Aryan Nations meetings, the Aryan Nations and the overt white supremacists. The Aryan Nations was a fusion of Klan and neo-Nazis. And they could get a couple of hundred people together in their national meetings. These folks could fill stadiums, the ones I'm talking about. And, and as it evolved, you saw a phenomenon called the Promise Keepers. They filled stadiums across the country, from LA to the East Coast and everywhere in between. And the Promise Keepers was a Christian Reconstructionist, Dominionist movement that were trying to bring men together into disciplined cadre under leadership. And they taught them about structures of power. And I did a study of this phenomenon called Shepherding Discipleship, which disciplined members and put them into basically cult-like submission to leadership.
Russ, where does Trump fit into this? I see that Reagan.
He comes in later. Yeah.
Okay, you've said Reagan was a conduit for this, right?
Right, but everything in the Trump base comes out of this phenomenon.
All right, Professor Simpson is back. We missed you, but your absence enabled Russ Bellant to get talking here.
And you know what I was saying, Chris. We've talked about it before. Yep.
Oh, welcome back. Thank you, Russ.
Sure.
Chris, are you okay?
I'm okay. I just my hand got caught in this office chair.
Well, I'm going to tell you what your kindergarten teacher used to tell you: keep your hands to yourself.
That's always been good advice.
Yes, sir. Okay, so Russ was giving us some background about some of these people: James Dobson, the Christian Coalition, and the issue of Christian Reconstructionists. And I think now would be a good time to talk about some of these lawsuits, Chris. More than a dozen, right? Sponsored by Christian nationalists that have essentially resulted in some serious damage. Are there any specific court cases that you can cite?
There's some that are underway now, and they're in my other notebook, but the gist of them is there's a, as Russ was pointing out, there's a very strong effort on the part of Christian nationalists to create grouplets that are bound by a religious or a pseudo-religious ideology and make those into convincing cells. So I was going through some of the, what they do is they teach people how to organize closed organizations that maintain relatively strict discipline among the supporters. And Russ can give you chapter and verse on this. But one thing that I did just recently is went through a number of these cases that are pending now. And so, for example, here's a denial of tenure case of a woman who was had a job at a religious college, and they worked out a way to accuse this minister of not being sufficiently Christian because she was married to her partner, and that proved that she was not a true Christian. And so then what happened is the woman took him to court saying, you can't fire me from my job just because you don't agree with my interpretation of religion. What kind of America is that? But what they did is that they turned the screws on her and said, yes, we can do that. And because we are religious institutions, we can deny her tenure on the basis that we don't agree with her private life. And unfortunately, this succeeded in the courts. There are half a dozen other cases similar to this that are in Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, half a dozen other states, and so forth, so that the what I would argue is false claim of Christian virtue has succeeded in some court cases to say, oh no, if it's a religious organization, they do not have to abide by the ordinary law of the United States, and therefore this particular woman, in her case, was denied tenure. And I think that is exactly what these ultra-Christians have in mind. What else can we do with this?
Well, Russ, you could pick up right there, I think.
Yeah. I think there's two things that I point out. Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has been doing for years presentations on the takeover of the Supreme Court and the federal court system. And it's very impressive in detail. And he gives these from the Senate floor. I think the Senate might be fairly empty at the time. There's no sign that the senators are taking this on seriously. But I mean, he has talked about the funding networks. They spent about $500 million engineering the takeover primarily of the Supreme Court. And that's, for some of them, the whole reason that they support Donald Trump isn't because, and they claim to be religious conservatives. They overlook that he's, a sexual predator and abuser, that he's a pathological liar, that his whole lifestyle has been contrary to theirs. They looked at him as the person who's appointing the justices and the judges to the court system. And this engineering of it comes out of people associated with the Council for National Policy. It's been some of their key funders have been behind this.
Which Russ is a Christian organization.
Well, the dominant voices in the Council for National Policy are James Dobson and people of his ilk.
All right, can you tell our audience a little bit about him, please?
Yeah. James Dobson runs or has ran at this time the Focus on the Family. And Focus on the Family branched out into the Family Research Council, which kind of became their more overt political arm. But Focus on the Family formed chapters around the United States and created cells in various churches that operated under names like Citizens for Better Schools. Unlike the Christian Coalition always was overt and worked in their own name, Focus on the Family avoids that completely. To give you an idea of the magnitude of his operation, he had $100 million budget. He had 1,200 staff people running this operation, and it was on Radio Free Asia, and he was broadcasting around the world. And and Radio Free Asia had links to the U.S. government. Okay. Just like Radio Free Europe did. So there's very powerful. But the Citizens United decision also came out of them. Bossy, the guy who was the head of the group of Citizens United that brought this case, basically said that the wealthy could control elections. They could fund whoever they want.
All right. So speaking of the wealthy, Chris, can you talk about Tim LaHaye?
Tim LaHaye. Sure. That's kind of a whole discussion by itself, but to put it briefly, Tim LaHaye is a fundamentalist minister. He's still alive. He's out in California at last report. But what he does, he was bewitched, if you will, by the book of Revelation, which is the last book of the Bible. And I urge everybody to read it. It's because it is majorly Nazi. And you can decide for yourself what you think of it. But in any case, what it says is that there's a variety of satanic predictions made in the book of Revelation that basically say, well, here's why all the people that we don't agree with are devilish. It's because they're going to go to hell because they don't agree with Tim LaHaye's version of the book of Revelation. Now, I'll say right here, I'll bet you can walk way down the street and ask everybody that you meet, what happens in the book of Revelation? And you're not going to get a clear answer because it's tailored to be mystical writing of about the 4th century. So that's what LaHaye has made a fortune on. I mean, a literal fortune, just writing these books that are kind of tailored to be.
The end.
Chris, what are they called? The end times books, or what?
The general topic is called End Times, and what it purports to be is predictions that Tim LaHaye and others have deduced from ancient biblical scripture as to supposedly how the world is going to end. And that's generically, it's called End Times. That's that group of predictions. And if you want to, if you want to have a conversation about this topic and you find somebody who's interested in talking about end times, all you have to do is open the door. It's because they'll talk your ears off. But the gist of it is that if you don't go along with a particular version of biblical Christianity, then you are doomed to hell. Period. End of discussion.
I think you referred to it as the left behind theories, right?
Sure. Left behind is another way it's referred to. Yeah, absolutely. And it's popular. I mean, there's movies made out of this stuff and so on. And unfortunately, it's become a meme of sorts in modern day mass culture. You can see movies on your television set that are about an airplane is going down into obliteration in a crash on a runway, and either it's going to crash or not, and then stay tuned for next week, and then the commercials play and so on. It's a powerful, interesting, and in a kind of 6-way fascinating meme about how religion works.
So thank you, Chris. So Russ, how does this play out in our politics?
Well, Tim LaHaye was the person who met with the leaders of the John Birch Society, William Size, and with Nelson Bunker Hunt, and they were the ones that formed the Council for National Policy. So you got this like end time scenario guy, and they brought, because of his stature as it was then, the end times made it even bigger stature, but he had already branched out ministries across, and he had connectivity to the Dobson people and Pat Robertson and all the rest of them. And basically their world outlook is that the United States is a divine nation. And so their and it's chosen to rule and reign over the world. And that's why America was founded. to rule and reign to the end times. And it's an instrument of the end times. And they teach that doctrinally to keep people religiously bound to that worldview and using the United States as an instrument. So everything that they're doing through the Council for National Policy and other networks is trying to undercut and undermine what I called in the Coors book, the democratic pluralism of this country, and create a theocratic dominance of the United States to use it as the instrument in the world. I mean, and they were involved. I mean, Pat Robertson sent a whole ship, I mean a freighter, a large freighter load of material, of evangelical material to Russia as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed. And Paul Weyrich and other people who were the architects of this Council for National Policy stuff were holding meetings in St. Petersburg, then I think it was then called Leningrad, and in Moscow. And they were training the people that they wanted to have rise in rule in Russia in the post-Gorbachev era. And some of those people are in positions of influence today and form part of the base of the ruling forces in Russia. So they've really extended themselves around. They hold conferences in Hungary. They hold conferences all over the world. And virtually no attention is made of this in the American press.
What is, I'll throw this to both of you. What is Steve Bannon's connection to all of this?
Well, if you don't mind, Chris,
Go for it.
Thanks. Steve Bannon and Kellyanne Conway and Bossy from Citizens United were all part of the Council for National Policy Forces, and they were the core that came together to help Trump win his presidential campaign in 2016. Bannon took over Breitbart News when Andrew Breitbart was no longer on the scene, and he turned it into, according to his internal critics within their movement, he turned it into a white ethno-nationalist, is how they described it, white ethno-nationalist operation. Whereas before, Breitbart had just been kind of like more anarchically anti-progressive. He turned it into a consciously more white-oriented news operation. And then Kellyanne Conway was tied to like the Mercer money on Wall Street, Robert Mercer, the zillionaire on Wall Street, and they became the key strategic arm. And everybody knows, Bannon at that time was Trump's right-hand guy. And again, that speaks to the networks and power. When Donald Trump spoke to the Council for National Policy, which was his key base instrument, they pixelated the faces of every member in the audience so that their membership could remain secret. That's how they operate.
So as children of Holocaust survivors, we are perhaps more attuned than other people to the notion of conspiracy theories, right? Jews were blamed for just about everything under the sun in order to justify their murder.
Yes.
How do we look at this phenomenon, what you're calling white Christian nationalism, in a way that is fair?
That is fair. I'll give it a try. White Christian nationalism is a meme of right-wing America that says that everything that they do is bad for us, and everything that we do is good for them, and that therefore there has to be, or there needs to be, a fundamental change in the organization of power and the distribution of power in the United States. they're really pretty straightforward about it. I mean, if you go to the trouble to track down their meetings and so forth, but I think a better way to get a handle on it is the arrival of the new Speaker of the House. Give me
Mike Johnson.
Yeah.
Mike Johnson, absolutely, Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson is a main, articulate, effective speaker that promotes these types of theories, and he seems to be willing to play. This is my opinion, nothing more than that. He plays all the sides against the middle, so that if it's useful to him to portray people as stooges of this group or that group, he'll do that. And if that's too complicated, then he'll go easier routes.
Okay, so we saw, those of us who were on the call in the beginning, we saw some troubling footage from Charlottesville, followed by some troubling footage from the United States Capitol. And
something about that footage is that Johnson made his career out of being an advocate for defending public schools that where Jewish students were attending, and that had begun to evangelize in those schools, and so that the curriculum promoted in the school was a Christian curriculum, and it was a believing Christian curriculum. And after a while, the families of the kids that were going through this brainwashing started to complain and even brought legal action against it. And Johnson's job for 8 or 10 years has been a crackerjack lawyer that goes into these cases and comes up with a defense for the school to use this type of what I would characterize as intentional brainwashing to as part of their curriculum, and that extends the reach of these Christian nationalist groups, and has been very successful for Mike Johnson. That's who he is. That's where he.
I would add to that a bit too.
So I just want to ask Chris, thank you.
Sure.
Russ, what does this mean for those among us who may not be white or Christian?
Well, I think Chris and I would agree that the outlook of these groups, the ultra militants of these groups, is that anything that is not born again Christian dominion is any influence that's outside of that realm is a tool of Satan.
Right.
It must be contained and diminished and ended wherever possible. I'll say this again from my direct. I worked with a network, a loose network of people who were attending the Christian Coalition stuff. And in Louisiana and Texas, the Christian Coalition was cover for Klan.
Right.
Let me.
David
Duke, well-known name to all of us. David Duke was endorsed for governor by the Louisiana Christian Coalition. When they were talking about a new Speaker of the House, to bring it back to today, one of the names that was being tossed around for a week or so was Stephen Scalise. Scalise was a participant and David Duke campaigns, the Euro nation stuff. Scalise was actually tied to that. That wasn't apparently his cause for defeat, but we're looking at people in Congress who were there to implement this agenda, because if you're one of these outlooks that all of us outside their brand of Christianity, because obviously the liberal denominations are also anathema to them. You're a tool of Satan. You're a satanic influence.
Well, I should say,
everyone knows what that means.
Right. I mean, we're also vermin, right?
Yeah, I caught that word again on your one of your Nazi speakers. Yeah.
Speaking as a representative of the enemies of American society, as we are in the mainstream media, I would like to know whether you regard Trump or DeSantis as more dangerous. I mean, Trump has referred to the mainstream media as the enemies of the American people.
Yeah.
Which I mean, I embrace that if that's what he wants to consider me. But we know that DeSantis is also posing a danger. For some reason, Russ and Chris, we see this white Christian nationalism as, I believe, confined to the Republican Party, if I'm not mistaken. I'd like you to address why that is, and whether DeSantis or Trump is more dangerous to those of us who may not be white or Christian.
Well, I think DeSantis has implemented the agenda more aggressively within his domain than Trump did, because Trump didn't have the combination of power. DeSantis has virtually a rubber stamp legislature. Trump never had that. But his willingness to destroy the Disney empire over their orientation, statements they made on public policy, I think it is a stunning example. But DeSantis is, when he goes back when he was in the Navy, he was conducting torture in person with his own hands in Guantanamo Bay. He has this idea of destroying things that he don't agree with him. And I think Trump has much of that disposition too. And if he was given national power again, the script has already been written. The Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. has already written the script. They call the Agenda 2025, I believe is the title of it, for when Trump takes power in January 1, 2025, as they envision. They're going to gut government leadership across the board and put in people. They don't want the William Barrs for Attorney General, because William Barr wasn't a 100%er. They're going to be pulling from their Council for National Policy ranks and from their Dominionist ranks and put people in agencies across the country to control. And you're going to see Donald Trump significantly more like DeSantis's behavior in Florida if he were reelected.
So that's very, very enlightening. Where do we go from here?
Well, to get back to the beginning of your question was what does this mean for Jews in particular? That these various trends, and I think it's a fair question. And the part of the answer is that if you want to raise your kids with the ability to speak Hebrew, you're going to have to oppose what they're doing in the public schools, which is to make sure that Hebrew is not viewed as a living language in public schools. And I think that that's very unfortunate. I think it's fundamentally racist. But nevertheless, that is the way they think.
I would say that when you see the efforts to dismantle public school systems, primarily using charter schools as instrument, you should know that the agenda of the charter school movement initiated, by the DeVosses in the early 90s. In Michigan, we didn't even have a law that allowed it, and the Constitution doesn't allow the funding of charter schools, but they get it anyways. It's specifically banned. All private schools are banned from receiving public money, but they have such political power that the Michigan Constitution is overridden, and they're massively funded. When you see take the institutions that bring Americans together in common, our public schools, our libraries, our universities, and you start seeing ways of separating people, and those are fights that need to be fought, not just on standard good government and sectarian, but it's attempts to destroy, bring pluralism, and bring monopoly dominionist ideology to the fore. So those fights need to be waged. David, when he asked me this question a week ago about, what do we do about this? People for the American way used to be a prominent voice in our country. They used to, they were doing research and they were identifying and express it. I don't know where they're at now. They seem to still exist. I don't know.
They still exist. Yeah.
But I don't see either the media isn't covering them, or what they're not doing the work in the way they've done it in the past. But I think some version of that needs to be amplified, and at the local and state level, there needs to be a civic organization formed to support democratic pluralism in this country, and begin to have the capacity to okay, I see Ken's comment, the only ways. That means that the public needs to take accountability on when schools are failing, and don't automatically assume every report that says that they're failing is a failure, because the charter schools are intended, when they get full control of the government, to turn them into private schools with public funding, with the same kind of issues that Chris was talking about earlier, in terms of controlling the agendas and the indoctrination. And that's not, I'm just going to say, charter schools were created for an agenda purpose. 1993, the DeVos said all public education in Michigan needs to be destroyed and put into charter schools. Their agenda was to amend the Constitution so that they could be publicly funded as private schools and be doctrinally controlled by the religious right. That isn't every charter school in the country, but once you accept the concept of destroying public education, creating private education, and funding it publicly, that's creating the model. And because they can say, well, you're helping Black kids in this place, and that's going to be their defense for this nationwide phenomenon, you're playing a risky game. And what you need to do is address getting the public schools on track to be what they're supposed to be, because I know they're deficient everywhere. And part of the reason is we've had state legislatures across this country undermining public education. And, we experience it here. I think it's been played out in various battles in the state of Pennsylvania as well. And
I do want to, that's really excellent, gentlemen. I want to give folks a chance to ask questions. In a moment, I'm going to call on Huntley Collins, my former colleague at the Inquirer. But first, I must call on our friend Norman A. Carter Jr., who actually had the three of us on his show right after the horrible storming of the Capitol. Within a month, he had us on his show. And now he's running for Snellville City Council in Snellville, Georgia. And everyone on this call we would all vote for you if we could, but I want to give you an opportunity to speak right now first, please.
Thank you, David. I'd first like to begin. I don't think there's anyone who has impacted or touched my life more since 1998, 1999 than you in so many different areas. I will say that when we go back to my program, in which I invited you, Russ, and Professor Simpson, that when January 6th happened, the first thing that I remembered was your article. I think it was written in 1988 about the influx of Nazism into the Republican Party, and I thought it was just so relevant. And I've talked about it so many times since then. You may have noticed I have reposted that program on Facebook several times. Mm-hmm. I have talked about it with members of my church. I've sent that video to them, and I want to go back 1 second to I heard the Book of Revelations being mentioned. Fact is that the Book of John in the New Testament is the most popular among anti-Semites. And I think when we talk about going back to the genesis of what we have now as far as anti-Semitism, you really have to go back to the way the New Testament of the Bible and certain portions of the Old Testament have been edited from what they were originally meant. And I can go back to something that I'm sure you can identify with. It wasn't until around the 1970s that the Pope had an encyclical which stated that which apologized for calling the Jews Jesus killers for centuries, and there are still people who still believe that. Mm-hmm. And that fact, that erroneous fact, has made Jewish people the foil for nearly every tyrant and dictator across the world. It's rather Machiavellian, where you have to keep an enemy at the door. If you can't find anybody else, blame the Jews. Hitler did it. It's been done here in the United States, and this topic is as a Christian is of great interest to me. I think about the influence which is ignored today of the Jewish people in the civil rights movement in the United States. It's very much overlooked, but I haven't overlooked it. I talk about it on my broadcast often, and I'm just so honored to be here. I am learning. I've taken 3 or 4 pages of notes so far that I intend to use in the very near future, and I'm just honored that you invited me.
Well, you can perhaps use that as your next book.
Absolutely. Yes. I would love to. Yes.
Tell folks how they can donate to your campaign.
Yes, my website is www.norman and the number 4 Snellville SNELLVILLE.com. That's my webpage, and all the information that you would need, including my background, will be on that page.
And I will say that my wife.
And thank you.
My wife and I made a modest donation, to the future councilman's campaign, and I encourage everyone to consider doing the same thing at the website that I just put up there. Thank you, sir. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Collins, it's all yours now.
I want to thank David also for allowing me to take part in this wonderful conversation. Very much appreciate what's been lifted up here. I also want to ask you to check the chat box and to please email me if you have any interest in continuing the dialogue in an interfaith setting. I am a member of St. Martin in the Fields Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. We have been studying white Christian nationalism for the past 6 months. We have brought in to the church two scholars, Philip Zorski from Yale and Pamela Cooper White from Union Theological Seminary. If you haven't read their books, they're wonderful. And this has sparked
Huntley, please try to speak up. We had a comment that it's hard to hear you.
Okay. And this has sparked our attempt to pull together an interfaith coalition to combat white Christian nationalism here in the Philadelphia area. What form that might take, we have no idea, but we want to begin a dialogue, and we'd love to cross faiths and do this. Right now, we have about 16 different Christian churches, many of them in Northwest Philadelphia, that have sent representatives, and we had a workshop to really just touch the surface, and we're beginning. From my perspective, there are two key issues. One is, how do we counter this, and how do we counter it now? The house is on fire. We have an election coming up in which we could see democracy die, and these people are critical parts of that. But the second part of it that we haven't talked about is prevention. How do we help people not to get attracted to this movement? And from my perspective, former labor reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer, someone who's done a lot of thinking about the economy, I think we need to begin to focus on what can we do in terms of federal policy to open up opportunities for people in rural areas who are attracted to this philosophy. The data indicate that what white Christian nationalists have in common is they are generally older, they are generally male, they are generally have no college education, and they generally live in rural areas. Many of these people were totally overlooked by deindustrialization. There are no jobs in their community. There is no job retraining. They turn to these movements to find meaning and hope in their lives. And I think that's the other side of it. In addition to preventing it and speaking up against it and countering it now, we need to change public policy so that people are not attracted to this. So I leave you with that. If you're interested in joining with us, please email me. My email is on the chat. And thank you so very much for even considering this topic.
Yeah, you'll hear from me.
When you have a minute, put up the address, the URL on the screen.
Okay, it's up there. Chris Huntley has written a long note up here on the chat here, so you can access that. We're not ending the show anytime soon. I just wanted to ask Russ and Chris about the Proud Boys, because the Proud Boys have had a significant presence here in Philadelphia. Are they carrying this this flag, so to speak?
I think they're certainly fellow travelers. The genesis of the Proud Boys are a guy whose name I'm forgetting offhand, but he is a rich media guy who has helped to underwrite the Proud Boys, and so he got them into some training programs and that sort of thing, and underwrote their self-promotion and so on. And I never saw any particular virtue to the Proud Boys, but they certainly saw virtue to themselves. Anyway, it was tied to this media mogul, and he was sponsoring the Proud Boys for some months, maybe even some years, and they had a big presence out in the Bay Area, and they have a presence in Washington. They'll show up uninvited, pretty much, from if there's any kind of showdown type thing that they feel they can make some progress by beating people up. But in any case, that's the Proud Boys. That they last I saw of them in person, they were not in the DC area. They had moved, I think, back out to the Bay Area.
Yeah. In response to Huntley's question about how people get reached out in the Farm Belt areas and that sort of thing, there was several things. One, organizations, the Center for Democratic Renewal that used to exist in Atlanta, did a lot of organizing in the Farm Belt, and they're operating now as IHER something. I can't remember the full acronym. In the Northwest, which was where the Aryan nations and so many of the white supremacists had galvanized. And so Lenny Zeskind was the research director for that. He's out of Kansas City, and Lenny had an incredible history, and I think people should contact him and capture some of his wisdom. I think he's semi-retired now, but the other force that developed, because which does kind of a counter stereotype to these to the agrarian population, is the Jesse Jackson presidential campaign. They organized in the Farm Belt, and a lot of the dissenting and disgruntled farmers heard what he had to say and became supporters. So between those forces, they were separating, the agrarian farmers who were being displaced by agribusiness, and they saw champions in the more progressive world of politics at that time, I think Lenin and others worked in that context as well. So we don't have organizations that care about segments of our population anymore that fight for them the way we used to 30, 40 years ago. And
Russ, I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
No, I'm done with that also.
Well, so we have a couple of questions. First of all, Ken Kaplan suggesting that the name that Chris was reaching for was Gavin McInnes.
Yes.
Also, we have a comment from Barbara Beitman and her husband, Joe Brightman. While there are issues to address in the Republican Party, we must also recognize that there are significant numbers in the Democratic Party who are now espousing anti-Semitism and anti-Israel policies as well, and must be addressed. And
well, it's true. I mean, to the extent that there are anti-Semites in any organization, that needs to be addressed. I think that we need a bigger poster here to take on some of these big picture issues, and I'm not sure that that I can do it out of my retirement pay.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Russ is still working, so he's going to respond.
Yes, I always thought of Russ as the money and behind.
I call myself retired. I'm 75 years old. I call myself retired, which means I'm a free agent, and nobody's helping me so far. But I'm looking at the question that Matt and Susan Kleiman posted. Who poses the most significant threat to Jewish community, the far right or the far left? I'm going to say that I think in terms of society in general, I don't think the far left has a presence of power. Okay, now there's protests going on that are disturbing, but some of those protests, at least in our area, and there are a number going on every day in the Tri-County area around Detroit. Not too many of them in Detroit proper, but in the Tri-County area, and many of them are led by Detroit Jews for Peace. And I know the ADL has made some comments to imply that they're, some of the Jewish groups are anti-Semitic as well. And I just wouldn't agree with that. But even so, their voices are not powerful on the national stage. The far right has power. If you look at the Trump supporters, he has a solid base of 30% of the voting public. A solid base. There's nothing on the far left. I mean, nothing on the left at all that has any claim of that sort. So if Christian dominionism isn't perceived as a threat, it's because people don't understand what it is and how it's built this solid base. And if it goes to 40% next year and 5 years down the road, it's 50%. Decide where where the biggest threat is coming from.
I want to call on someone who's a relatively new friend, right? Rosa Borg she's a new friend of mine, and I don't even know where she's located, but I hope she'll tell us.
I'm in Malta. It's a small island in Europe, south of Italy.
Wow. Right.
And I was interested in this because I could see similarities to what is happening in the rest of the world. And that is my question, whether it's just me over worrying or whether the rest of you see it as well. Because what you all said, especially what you, Huntley, said about those who are drawn to these groups, if you apply it to 2 different countries, including mine, it's the inner harbor area, the south, who are neglected, but the ramifications are the same.
Sure.
So my question is whether you see it in other countries as well.
Yes.
Because I see it and I find it really worrying.
Yes. Yeah. In Germany, we're seeing the influence of the growth of neo-Nazi influence. Here's a question that complicates all of this. Marie Le Pen, everybody knows the national
yes.
in France and what it is and what its roots are.
Italy as well, Meloni.
Yeah. Marie Le Pen is now being reported as having a base of support to become the next prime minister of France with the decline of Macron. You know, if Italy has had elections that have elected pro Mussolini for some time now, Berlusconi and others who are pro Mussolini.
Yes, Maloney is a relative of his.
Yes, yes, that's true. And so this fascism is a Western phenomenon, and I just don't see where the combination of power is coming in. And, you know, just to take my perspective on this, in 1998, we published a report that said there was the ethnic arm of the Republican National Committee was Waffen SS veterans.
Mm-hmm.
It included Waffen SS veterans. It's not quite the same.
What's this? I'm sorry, what's that?
I'm saying that at that particular time where you're talking, that the nationalities arm of the GOP was Waffen SS, and I don't think quite that
that's their origins. I mean, you know, with the Ukrainians, they were
sure.
OUN Banderists. They were with the Cossacks, the Nazarenko. He showed me his SS insignia. He showed me he was getting a pension for his service to Germany in World War II. He proved it to me. Okay, we had others, the Belarus in Belarus. You know, these were people who conducted exterminations of Jewish ghettos that they created.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
So okay, you know the story. I'm speaking as a generalization, Chris. Okay, but there was no, the ethnic arm did not include Jews. It did not include African Americans, and it didn't include anybody else except Euros. And you know, and the Democratic Party saw this and knew about it. The national media did. And there was complete silence. Okay, so except for the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Boston Globe.
Well, there will continue to be silence if Trump is reelected and journalists in the mainstream media get put back in cages. We're not going to be able to do our work.
Right. Yeah. So, the New York Times let me do an op-ed, and but they waited until after the election to publish it.
Right.
See, so where is our capacity for outrage about this?
Well, and I think it's important to recognize that the media is also significantly depleted today. Huntley can speak to this too, as a journalism professor, and recognizing that the opportunities. You know, I was asked to serve as a mentor to young students the other day, young Penn students, and I had to. I mean, I was delighted to be there and to help guide them, but the landscape has changed so dramatically from the time that Huntley and I started out in the business that, you know, it's difficult to give much guidance now. But Huntley, did you have another comment? I see that your hand is raised. Okay, all right. Anyway, so I think that Joe and his wife Barbara are saying that we are underestimating the power of anti-Semitism in academic institutions and the younger people in the Democratic Party. So we've seen certainly both, well, just as recently as the other day on the Penn campus. Barbara, in fact, I think brought this to my attention recently. There was a professor from Stockton University. I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago. Actually, an Israeli professor who specializes in the Holocaust, who was speaking on the Penn campus soon after the incident that precipitated all of this horror took place in Israel when the people from Hamas the wall and came in and started murdering and raping and all of this. This guy, Raz Siegel, was saying that Israel, I mean, he came out right away and started criticizing Israel for committing genocide in Gaza. Well, he's still in a minority, but I took him to task for this because he's serving in a chair of Holocaust studies that for goodness sake was founded by Professor Franklin Littell, the Methodist minister who essentially founded the whole realm of Holocaust studies and who wrote a book called The Crucifixion of the Jews, an absolutely essential seminal work. Raz Siegel was causing Franklin Littell to be turning in his grave, to be accusing Israel of committing genocide in Gaza. Even Omer Bartov, who is a left-wing historian at Brown, is not suggesting that. He's saying that they might be close to committing genocide, but this guy at Stockton was right off the bat jumping in and saying that Israel was committing genocide in Gaza. Anyway, I think we've seen, yes, that young people on the campuses, particularly, notably, I should say, in Ivy League institutions, are jumping on this bandwagon. The young man at Cornell named Russell Rickford, who happens to be Black, and who was a correspondent in the Cherry Hill office of the Philadelphia Inquirer back in the day. He came out right away and said that he found the attacks exhilarating, the attacks on the Israelis by Hamas, exhilarating. So he had to apologize for that, and he's now on a leave of absence from Cornell. But these are the well, I should say that I did post that I found that he was a journalist who doesn't understand language and a historian who doesn't learn from history.
Pretty good.
On that note, I want to thank everybody so very much for joining us here today, especially our friend from Malta. That was a very nice surprise to have you on the call. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you. I hope you'll stay in touch with us. I don't have to hope. I know that Norman A. Carter Jr. will stay in touch with us. And I want to thank all my friends for being on the call today, and particularly Chris Simpson. We wish you good health. We want you to keep your hands off your phone. Keep your hands to yourself. I want to thank your wonderful partner in crime here, Charlotte Legates, for helping to facilitate this and to freeing your hands from their from whatever was going on there. And my dear friend Russ Bellant, all of you, I wish you all a happy Hanukkah, which starts on Thursday, a Merry Christmas, which starts on the 25th, which is on the 25th. It doesn't start on the 25th. and a happy Kwanzaa, which starts on the 26th of this month, and a happy new year to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for bringing us together.
Yes.
You're welcome. Thank you.